Colorado Territory, 1875. The sky brooded with storm clouds the color of anvils, a foreboding backdrop to the majestic peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Matthew Sutton pulled his hat lower against the wind as he guided his horse along the swollen creek. At 25, he'd already lived several lifetimes' worth of hardship on the frontier, leaving him with a simple philosophy. Trust the land, trust your horse, trust yourself, nothing else. Folks were fickle, settlements temporary, but survival was a constant companion. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning trails to mud and creeks to raging torrents. Matt knew better than to be caught in this weather, but he'd promised to deliver medicine to the Stewart homestead before their youngest took a turn for the worse. Promise kept, he was now racing the storm back to Silverdale. "Easy, Duster," he murmured to his dun stallion as thunder cracked overhead. The horse's ears flicked nervously as they rounded a bend in the trail that followed alongside Eagle Creek. That's when he heard it, a cry barely audible above the roaring water and drumming rain. Matt reined in, listening. There it was again, distinctly human. He dismounted, leading Duster closer to the creek's edge where the sound seemed to originate. The normally placid creek had transformed into a churning monster, its muddy waters carrying broken tree limbs and debris. 20 yards downstream, his eyes caught on something impossible, a young woman clinging desperately to a partially submerged tree that had fallen across the water. Her long black hair streamed around her face, and even from this distance, Matt could see she wouldn't last much longer. Her arms were wrapped around the trunk, but the savage current pulled at her body with each passing second. Without hesitation, Matt stripped off his heavy coat and gun belt. The frontier gives and takes, his father had taught him. Never forget, son, a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he does when no one's watching. Matt tied a rope around his waist and secured the other end to his saddle horn. He waded into the frigid water, gasping as it reached his thighs. The current immediately tried to sweep his feet from under him. "Hold on," he shouted, though he doubted she could hear him over the storm's fury. As the water deepened, he began swimming, fighting the pull with every stroke. The woman's head dropped slightly, her strength clearly failing. By the time Matt reached her, the water had risen further. Her dark eyes widened when she saw him, a mix of disbelief and desperate hope. "I've got you," he said, wrapping an arm around her slender waist. "Let go of the tree and hold on to me." She hesitated only a moment before releasing her grip. Immediately, the current caught them both, but Matt had anticipated this. He pulled on the rope, signaling Duster to back up. The faithful horse responded instantly, providing the counterforce they needed to fight the current. Inch by inch, Matt pulled them toward shore, the woman's arms clasped tightly around his neck. When they finally reached the muddy bank, Matt collapsed onto his knees, still holding her. She was shivering violently, her deerskin dress soaked through. "My name's Matthew Sutton," he managed between breaths. "Most folks call me Matt." "Ayasha Jones," she replied, teeth chattering. Her voice carried the slightest accent, melodic despite her exhaustion. "I am Ute. My people's camp is—" She gestured vaguely upstream before another shiver racked her body. Matt noticed her right ankle was swollen badly. At 20 years old, Ayasha possessed a quiet dignity even in her current state. Her high cheekbones and full lips complemented dark eyes that regarded him with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "That camp's at least 10 miles from here," Matt said, knowing the Ute had established a temporary settlement while negotiating with the territorial government. "And you're hurt, my cabin's not far. We need to get you warm and dry." Ayasha hesitated, understanding the impropriety of his offer, but another clap of thunder made the decision for her. "I accept your help." Matt helped her onto Duster, then mounted behind her. As they rode through the downpour, Ayasha leaned back against his chest, her exhaustion evident. Matt felt an unfamiliar protective instinct rise within him. He'd rescued stranded travelers before, but something about this young woman stirred emotions he'd long believed the frontier had stripped from him. The cabin came into view just as darkness fell, a modest but sturdy structure Matt had built with his own hands after leaving his family's ranch in Texas 3 years ago. He'd come north seeking solitude after the war between the states had claimed his brother and left Matt with nightmares he couldn't shake. The frontier offered anonymity and purpose. Survival left little time for painful memories. Inside, Matt stoked the banked fire while Ayasha stood dripping on the plank floor, looking simultaneously out of place and like she belonged there in some inexplicable way. "I have some spare clothes," he offered, retrieving a shirt and trousers from his trunk. "They'll be too big, but they're dry." "Thank you," she accepted them with dignity, waiting until he stepped outside to change. When Matt returned, Ayasha sat before the fire in his oversized clothing, her long hair spreading across her shoulders as it dried. She'd fashioned a makeshift bandage around her ankle from strips of her dress. "How'd you end up in that creek?" Matt asked, preparing a simple meal of beans and jerky. Ayasha's expression tightened. "I was gathering medicinal plants for our healer when the storm worsened. I tried crossing where the water seemed calm, but—" She shook her head. The spirits of the water were angry today. "Lucky I came along." Matt handed her a tin plate. "Not luck," she replied seriously. "The old ones say nothing happens without reason." Matt almost smiled. "Out here, I've found the only reason for most things is chance and poor decisions." "You do not believe in fate," she tilted her head, studying him with those penetrating eyes. "I believe a man makes his own way," he answered, the words familiar on his tongue. "The frontier doesn't care about fate or feelings, it only respects strength and preparation." "Yet you risked yourself for a stranger today." Matt shifted uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Ayasha said simply, "they would not." That night, Matt gave Ayasha his bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. As rain pounded the roof, he found himself unable to sleep, hyper-aware of her presence in his previously solitary world. Matt had built his life around independence, convinced that connections were liabilities in the unforgiving West. Loving someone meant giving them the power to destroy you when they inevitably left through death or choice. His brother's death and his sweetheart's subsequent marriage to another while Matt was fighting had cemented this belief. Yet something about Ayasha challenged these certainties, like water slowly wearing away stone. The storm raged for 2 more days, making travel impossible. Ayasha's ankle improved slowly, but not enough for the journey to her people's camp. During this time, an unexpected comfort developed between them. Matt found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, about his family's ranch in Texas, his time as a scout during the war, and his decision to seek solitude in Colorado. Ayasha, in turn, spoke of her people's struggles as white settlers pushed further into traditional Ute lands. As the daughter of a Ute woman and a white trader who had eventually abandoned them, Ayasha straddled 2 worlds, never fully belonging to either. "My mother's people accepted me," she explained on the second evening, helping Matt prepare dinner. "But some still see my father's blood when they look at me, and in town," she didn't need to finish. Matt had seen how mixed-blood Indians were treated. "People fear what they don't understand," Matt said, surprising himself with the insight. "And they understand even less than they think they do." Ayasha smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her serious face. "You are wiser than you pretend to be, Matthew Sutton." "Don't tell anyone," he replied with an unexpected lightness. "I've cultivated my reputation as a simple cowhand." On the 3rd morning, the sun finally emerged. Matt found Ayasha outside, her face turned toward the light. Her dark hair, now fully dry, fell in waves past her waist. In his oversized shirt and trousers, cinched with rope at the waist, she should have looked ridiculous. Instead, she looked strangely at home. "I should return to my people today," she said without preamble. "They will be worried." Matt nodded, ignoring the strange hollowness her words created. "I'll take you." The journey to the Ute encampment took several hours. As they approached, Matt became increasingly aware of the suspicious glances directed his way. A gathering crowd watched their arrival, and an older man stepped forward to help Ayasha from the horse. "This is my uncle, Chief Gray Wolf," she explained. "Uncle, this is Matthew Sutton. He saved me from the flooding creek." The chief studied Matt with piercing eyes before extending his hand in the white man's custom. "Our people owe you a debt, Matthew Sutton." "No debt," Matt replied awkwardly. "Anyone would have done the same." "Again you say this," Ayasha murmured beside him. "Again, it is untrue." After explaining what had happened, Ayasha disappeared into a lodge with several women, presumably to change and have her injuries properly treated. Chief Gray Wolf insisted Matt stay for a meal, an honor Matt understood couldn't be refused without causing offense. The afternoon passed in a blur of unfamiliar customs and cautious conversations. Matt observed how Ayasha moved through the camp with quiet authority, clearly respected despite her mixed heritage. When she finally returned to his side, she wore a beautifully beaded buckskin dress, her hair partially braided with small shells woven through the plaits. "You look," Matt struggled for words. "More like myself," she supplied with a small smile. As twilight approached, Matt knew he should leave. "Your people have been kind, but I should head back before dark." Ayasha walked with him to where Duster was tethered. "The elders have invited you to return for our summer gathering in one moon," she said. "It is rare for outsiders to receive such an invitation." Matt hesitated. The solitary path he'd chosen had no room for social obligations or connections. "I'm not much for gatherings." "Consider it," she urged. "My uncle says a man who risks his life for one of our own should be considered a friend." As he mounted his horse, their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, a connection that defied Matt's carefully constructed barriers. "Perhaps I will," he found himself saying, though the words contradicted everything he believed about surviving the frontier. True to his unexpected promise, Matt returned to the Ute camp 1 month later. He told himself it was simple courtesy, repaying the chief's hospitality. But as Duster crested the final ridge and he caught sight of Ayasha walking among the lodges, Matt admitted the truth he'd been avoiding. He'd thought of little else but her since their parting. The celebration was already underway when he arrived, a gathering to mark the summer solstice. Matt felt conspicuously out of place among the predominantly native crowd, but Ayasha's smile when she spotted him eased his discomfort. "You came," she said, approaching with measured steps that couldn't quite hide her pleasure. "I said I might," Matt dismounted, suddenly self-conscious of his trail-worn appearance. Throughout the evening, Ayasha introduced him to various members of her tribe, translating when necessary. Matt observed the complex social structure, so different from yet similar to the frontier communities he knew. When the dancing began, he stayed on the periphery, watching as Ayasha participated in a traditional dance, her movements graceful and practiced. "She dances for you," a voice said beside him. Matt turned to find Chief Grey Wolf observing him with knowing eyes. "I doubt that," Matt replied, uncomfortable with the implication. The chief made a noncommittal sound. "My niece has refused many suitors, both from our people and from those who come to trade. She says her spirit is waiting for someone who sees both sides of her world." Matt shifted uneasily. "I'm just a cowhand passing through." "Are you?" The chief regarded him steadily. 3 years in one place is not passing through, Matthew Sutton. "The traders speak of you, the quiet man who built his cabin near Eagle Creek, who breaks horses better than any man for 50 miles, who keeps to himself but never refuses to help a neighbor in need." Before Matt could respond, a commotion broke out on the far side of the gathering. A group of white men, obviously intoxicated, had ridden into the camp. "Johnson," Grey Wolf identified the leader with distaste, "a trapper who believes all land should belong to white men and all resources are his to take." Matt recognized the type immediately, frontier predators who used the lawlessness of the territories to terrorize those they considered beneath them. He'd encountered such men before and had the scars to prove it. "Looky here." Johnson shouted, dismounting unsteadily. "Injuns having themselves a party," his gaze fixed on the dancers, particularly the women, and some mighty fine-looking squaws too. Several Ute men moved protectively toward their families. Matt noticed Ayasha standing with remarkable composure, though her eyes reflected concern. Grey Wolf stepped forward. "You are not welcome here, Johnson. Leave now before trouble starts." "Trouble?" Johnson laughed, drawing a flask from his coat. "We're just looking for some hospitality. Maybe one of them pretty girls can show us some." His companions laughed, their hands hovering near their weapons. Matt counted 5 men, all armed. The Ute outnumbered them, but Matt knew the trappers wouldn't have come without believing they held the advantage. "This is Ute land," Grey Wolf stated firmly, "recognized by treaty with your government." "Treaties?" Johnson spat. "Paper promises that mean nothing out here. This is white man's territory now." The tension escalated when one of Johnson's men grabbed at a young Ute woman. Her brother immediately intervened, and within seconds, guns were drawn. Matt moved forward without conscious thought, positioning himself between the two groups. "That's enough, Johnson." The trapper squinted at him in surprise. Well now, if it ain't the loner from Eagle Creek, what's your stake in this, Sutton? Gone native on us. These people are under territorial protection, Matt said evenly. Governor Evans himself signed the agreement. You want to explain to him why you violated it. Johnson wavered slightly, his bravado checked by the mention of authority. The frontier might be lawless in places, but even men like Johnson knew the consequences of directly challenging territorial governance. We're just having some fun, he muttered, though Matt noticed his companions lowering their weapons slightly. Have it elsewhere, Matt suggested coldly. Now. Something in Matt's stance, perhaps the casual readiness of a man who'd faced violence before, gave Johnson pause. After a tense moment, he spat on the ground. This ain't over, he warned, looking past Matt to Grey Wolf. Your kind ain't long for this land. After the trappers departed, the celebration resumed, though with subdued energy. Matt found himself the recipient of grateful acknowledgments from the Ute, many who had previously regarded him with suspicion. Later, as the fires burned low, Ayasha sought him out. You risked making an enemy today, she said softly. Matt shrugged. Johnson was already an enemy to anyone decent. Still, you stood with us when you could have remained neutral. Her dark eyes studied him. Why? The question penetrated deeper than Matt was comfortable with. He looked away, toward the distant mountains silhouetted against the night sky. Because it was right, he finally said, the simplicity of the answer surprising even himself. Ayasha touched his arm lightly. You say you believe a man makes his own way, that the frontier respects only strength. Yet today you showed that justice matters to you, that you would defend those who cannot defend themselves equally. Your actions speak of a different belief than your words. Her insight was unsettling. Matt had constructed his solitary existence around the conviction that emotional detachment was necessary for survival. Yet here he stood, having inserted himself into a conflict that wasn't his, for people he barely knew, all because of the woman beside him. Perhaps, he conceded, unwilling to examine this contradiction too closely. As summer progressed, Matt found himself drawn repeatedly to the Ute camp. What began as occasional visits evolved into a regular pattern. He would bring game he'd hunted or supplies from town, lingering for hours in conversation with Ayasha and her family. In return, she taught him Ute words and customs, laughing at his clumsy attempts to pronounce her language. During one such visit in late August, Ayasha suggested they ride to a nearby meadow where late summer wildflowers bloomed in profusion. Away from the watchful eyes of her tribe, they enjoyed a rare moment of privacy. My uncle says you remind him of my father, Ayasha said as they sat beneath the shade of a solitary pine tree, not in appearance but in spirit. He too was a quiet man who observed much and spoke little. Matt plucked a blade of grass, rolling it between his fingers. You don't speak of him often. There is little to say. He traded with our people for many years. He and my mother loved each other, but when pressure from other settlers grew, he chose to return to his own kind. A shadow crossed her face. He promised to return. He never did. I'm sorry, Matt said, meaning it. Ayasha shook her head. It taught me an important lesson. A person's heart can belong in two places, but eventually they must choose. The comment hung between them, loaded with implication. Matt felt a familiar urge to retreat, to protect himself from the vulnerability her words exposed. The frontier doesn't leave much room for choices, he said. Most times, we do what we must to survive. Is that truly what you believe? Ayasha turned to face him fully. That survival alone is enough. Is that why you live apart from others, in your cabin with only your horse for company? Her directness was both challenging and refreshing. Most white women Matt had known circled important topics with careful indirection, but Ayasha spoke her mind with disarming clarity. After the war, Matt began hesitantly, after losing my brother and returning to find my intended married to another, I decided connections were liabilities out here. People leave one way or another. The only certainty is that nothing lasts. And so you chose isolation before it could choose you, Ayasha observed. My father did the opposite. He made promises he couldn't keep because he feared hurting those he cared for. Both approaches spring from fear, Matthew. The insight struck uncomfortably close to home. Before Matt could formulate a response, the distant sound of hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. A rider approached at speed, a young Ute man Matt recognized as Grey Wolf's son. His expression was grim as he reined in beside them. "Johnson and his men have returned," he announced without preamble. "They bring others and speak of driving us from this land. My father asks for your counsel, Sutton." Matt and Ayasha exchanged a look of alarm before mounting their horses. The peaceful afternoon shattered, they rode hard back to the camp. They arrived to find the situation already deteriorating. Johnson had returned with nearly 20 men, not just trappers this time, but settlers and miners, all armed and belligerent. They faced off against the Ute warriors who had formed a protective line before their families. Grey Wolf stood at the center, dignity intact despite the threatening crowd. "This land is ours by right and by treaty," he was saying as Matt and Ayasha dismounted. "We have committed no crime." "Your crime is existing where white folks want to settle," Johnson retorted. "Word is the railroad's coming through these parts next year. This valley will be worth a fortune, and it ain't going to be wasted on savages." Matt stepped forward to stand beside Grey Wolf. Johnson's eyes narrowed when he spotted him. "Should have known you'd be here, Sutton," he sneered. "Always had a soft spot for Injuns, ain't that right? Wonder what folks in Silverdale would think if they knew one of their own was Ray Strader." "I'm not interested in your opinions, Johnson," Matt replied evenly. "But I am interested in preventing a massacre that would bring the U.S. Army down on this entire territory." "Is that what you want?" Johnson spat. "Army's on our side." "Are they?" Matt challenged. "Last I heard, Governor Evans doesn't take kindly to civilians starting Indian wars without his say-so. Especially not when it might jeopardize the railroad negotiations he's been working on for years." A murmur ran through the crowd of white men. Matt pressed his advantage. "Think about it. You start shooting here today, and even if you kill every Ute, the Army will hang half of you as an example. The governor can't afford to look weak on maintaining order, not with Eastern investors watching." Uncertainty flickered across Johnson's face, but his pride wouldn't let him back down easily. "We ain't leaving until these Injuns clear out. This valley's going to be settled proper." "And it will be," came a new voice from behind the crowd. All heads turned to see a group of riders approaching, the territorial marshal and several deputies, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit whom Matt recognized as a representative from the governor's office. Marshal Wilson pushed his way through the crowd. "Johnson, you're interfering with official territorial business. Governor Evans has sent Mr. Parker here specifically to negotiate with the Ute regarding relocation." The official dismounted, brushing dust from his coat. "Indeed, the governor has authorized me to offer Chief Grey Wolf's people a new reservation with better hunting grounds, further from the proposed railroad route." He glanced at the assembled Ute with what he clearly believed was benevolence. "A fair exchange that benefits all parties." Grey Wolf's expression remained impassive, though Matt noticed the tightening around his eyes. "We will hear these terms," he said carefully. Johnson looked outraged. "You're giving them more land, after they've been squatting here taking what's rightfully." "That's enough," the marshal cut him off. "The governor wants this handled peacefully. There's enough land for everyone if cooler heads prevail." As the tension gradually dissipated, Matt found himself standing awkwardly between two worlds. The government official regarded him with curiosity, clearly wondering about his place in this tableau. Ayasha had moved to her uncle's side, her face carefully composed though her eyes reflected concern when they met Matt's. The negotiations began immediately, with Parker outlining the governor's proposal. The Ute would relocate to a new reservation by the following spring, receiving compensation for improvements they'd made to their current land. In exchange, they would cede their claims to the valley, opening it for settlement and railroad development. Matt recognized the offer for what it was, better than forced removal at gunpoint, but still fundamentally unjust. The Ute were being pushed aside because others coveted what they had, cloaked in the language of progress and mutual benefit. As the discussions continued into evening, Ayasha found a moment to speak privately with Matt near the edge of camp. "This is what always happens," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "First they make treaties, then they decide the treaties are inconvenient. My people move and move again, each time to poorer land, each time with more promises that will be broken." Matt wanted to offer reassurance, but couldn't find words that weren't empty platitudes. "I'm sorry," he said instead, the inadequacy of the phrase hanging between them. "Will you follow?" she asked suddenly, the directness of her gaze making evasion impossible. "When my people move to this new reservation, will you come too?" The question struck at the heart of what had been growing between them, unacknowledged but undeniable. Matt had been avoiding this crossroads, knowing that whatever answer he gave would irrevocably alter his carefully isolated existence. Before he could respond, Chief Gray Wolf approached, ending their private conversation. "The official wishes to complete arrangements tomorrow," he informed them. "He has asked if you will attend, Matthew Sutton. He believes your presence may help ensure fair terms." Surprised by the request, Matt nodded. "If you think it would help." "It would," Gray Wolf confirmed. "You bridge our worlds in a way few can." That night, sleep eluded Matt as he considered Ayasha's question. Would he follow her people to their new reservation? The prospect of returning to his solitary existence after knowing her seemed hollow, yet the alternative meant abandoning everything he'd built for himself. It meant trusting, connecting, risking loss again. The negotiations the next day proceeded with surprising smoothness, largely due to Marshall Wilson's firm handling of Johnson and his supporters. Matt contributed where he could, clarifying points of confusion and occasionally suggesting compromises when discussions stalled. By afternoon, an agreement had been reached. The Ute would have until the following spring to relocate, and the compensation offered was more generous than initially proposed. It was, Matt recognized, about as fair as could be expected in a fundamentally unfair situation. As the official documents were prepared, Parker took Matt aside. "You've done good work here, Sutton. The governor appreciates men who can keep the peace. Have you considered a more formal role? The territory needs level-headed men who understand both settler and Indian perspectives." Matt shook his head. "I'm not one for politics." "Not politics," Parker clarified. "Practical solutions, think about it. A man with your skills could do well in territorial service." The offer lingered in Matt's mind as he watched the officials depart. It represented a path he'd never considered, using his understanding of both worlds to perhaps make a difference, rather than hiding from both in isolation. As the Ute camp began preparations for their eventual move, Matt found himself helping with practical matters, identifying good locations on the map, planning for winter provisions, considering routes that would be passable in spring. Through it all, Ayasha worked alongside him, their shared purpose creating a comfortable rhythm between them. One evening, as autumn painted the aspen trees gold, Matt and Ayasha walked along the creek that ran near the camp. The same creek that had brought them together now seemed symbolic of the changes flowing through their lives. "I have decided something," Ayasha said, stopping to face him. "I will not go with my people to the new reservation." Matt stared at her in surprise. "What, why not?" "Because I belong to both worlds and neither," she explained. "On the reservation, that will only become more apparent. The old ways are changing, Matthew. My mother's people must adapt or perish, but they must do so their way, preserving what matters most. I respect that path, but it is not mine." "What will you do?" Matt asked, struggling to understand this unexpected development. Ayasha looked at him directly, her courage evident. "That depends on you. I have lived between worlds all my life. I understand what it means to belong nowhere, but with you," she hesitated, "with you, I feel I could belong somewhere. Not to Ute land or white settlements, but to a place we might create together." The words hung between them, an offer and a question wrapped together. Matt felt the familiar urge to retreat, to protect himself from the vulnerability her proposal exposed. Yet something had changed in him since pulling her from the flooded creek months ago. "I've spent years believing the frontier leaves no room for connections," Matt said slowly. "That caring for someone meant inevitable loss. My brother died in the war, my sweetheart married another. I convinced myself solitude was safer." "And now," Ayasha prompted gently. Matt looked at her, really looked at her. Beyond her physical beauty, he saw her strength, her intelligence, her ability to navigate between cultures with grace despite the pain it sometimes caused her. He saw someone who understood loss as he did, who had faced rejection and found resilience. "Now I think I was wrong," he admitted. "The frontier's harsh, yes, but facing it alone doesn't make you stronger." It just makes you alone. He took her hand, a simple gesture that felt monumental. I can't promise it will be easy. People like Johnson aren't rare out here. I have never expected easy, Ayasha replied with a small smile. Only worthwhile. As autumn deepened into winter, Matt and Ayasha's relationship grew in complexity and certainty. They faced opposition from expected quarters. Johnson and his ilk made their disapproval known whenever Matt visited Silverdale, and some of the more traditional Ute elders questioned Ayasha's choice. Yet they found supporters too. Chief Grey Wolf gave his blessing, and several of Matt's neighbors showed surprising acceptance. Matt expanded his cabin, adding a second room and improving the furnishings. Ayasha divided her time between his homestead and her people's camp, bringing elements of her heritage to the small dwelling. Beautifully woven blankets, carefully crafted pottery, dried herbs hung from ceiling beams. In February, with snow blanketing the landscape, they were married twice, once in the Ute tradition with her people, and once by the circuit preacher who visited Silverdale. Few from town attended the Christian ceremony, but Marshal Wilson made a point of being there, a silent statement of official approval that mattered more than Matt had expected. As spring approached and the Ute prepared for their move to the new reservation, Matt and Ayasha faced their own decisions. Parker had returned with an official offer from the governor, a position as liaison between the territorial government and the native tribes, with responsibility for ensuring fair implementation of treaties and addressing disputes before they escalated to violence. It would mean travel, Matt said as they discussed the opportunity by their evening fire, time away from home, but also a chance to help create something better than what we've seen so far. Ayasha considered this, her fingers working a piece of buckskin she was crafting into gloves. My father chose his world over my mother's, she said thoughtfully, but you are proposing to stand between worlds to help them understand each other. With your help, Matt clarified. Your knowledge of Ute customs and language would be invaluable. She smiled at that, a partnership then. In all things, he agreed. The decision made, they began preparations for this new chapter. Matt's cabin would remain their home base, but they would establish relationships with both the reservation communities and the territorial officials. It was an unconventional path, fraught with challenges neither could fully anticipate. Yet it felt right in a way neither had experienced before. On the morning the Ute began their journey to the new reservation, Chief Grey Wolf presented them with a gift. A beautifully tanned buffalo hide painted with symbols of protection and prosperity. You walk a difficult trail between two peoples, he told them. Remember always that understanding grows from listening with the heart as well as the ears. Ayasha embraced her uncle, tears in her eyes but determination in her stance. This was not a final goodbye. They would visit often, but it marked a significant transition. As they watched the Ute procession move slowly northward, Ayasha leaned against Matt's shoulder. My mother used to say that water finds its path even through stone, she murmured. She meant that destiny sometimes reveals itself in unexpected ways. Matt thought of the flooded creek that had brought them together, how close he'd come to riding past without hearing her cry. One moment of inattention and their paths would never have crossed. I still don't know if I believe in destiny, he admitted, but I believe in choices and I choose us every day. Ayasha smiled up at him, the future reflected in her eyes. As do I. Together they turned toward home, toward the life they were building between worlds. The frontier remained as challenging as ever, but Matt no longer faced it alone. In Ayasha, he'd found not just a partner but a perspective that transformed his understanding of what it meant to truly survive. Not mere existence, but connection, purpose, and the courage to risk loving despite the uncertainties that surrounded them. The flood that had threatened to take Ayasha's life had instead washed away Matt's carefully constructed isolation. From those turbulent waters, something unexpected had emerged, a love strong enough to bridge cultural divides and resilient enough to weather frontier hardships. It wasn't the life either had imagined for themselves, but standing together at this crossroads, they recognized it as the one they were meant to find.